Hi everyone, and welcome to the CPP Education Team's Ask an Expert webinar, MBTI and Strong Tools in Career Counseling and Academic Advising. My name is Anjane Wright, and I'm an Associate Marketing Manager here at CPP. I'll be moderating today's webinar. First, I'd like to do a quick walkthrough of the webinar content. Today's webinar will run in approximately 90 minutes. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please submit them to me using the question function in the webinar controls. Judy will be pausing throughout the webinar today to answer your questions, and I'll give everyone a chance to send in their questions during these breaks. Two reps from CPP's education team are also in attendance, Jim Larkin and Jack Powers, and they'll be available to answer questions as well. As with all our webinars today, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording in approximately 1 week. Please note that the PowerPoint slides are not available for our Ask an Expert series. Though Karen isn't here, she insisted I ask you all to tweet during the webinar. She promised to be checking these out. So follow us at CPP Education and make sure to include hashtag CPPAAE so we can all see and reshare your tweets. Now I'm happy to welcome CPP's Ask an Expert, Judy Gruder, GS Principal and Trainer. Judy has been a career development program consultant and trainer for more than 35 years, as well as a National Certified Counselor and NCDA Master Career Counselor. She is a recognized authority on the uses of assessments in career counseling and is co-author of a number of publications and reports on the Strong Interest Inventory, such as the iStartStrong report and Myers-Briggs tools. Now please join me in welcoming Judy. And now I'd like to turn the webinar over to her. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Anjane. Is Karen really tweeting from China? I'm really excited. That could be so cool. Hi, everyone, and happy holiday season. It's hard to believe that 2013 is winding down, and we've got another year right around the corner. I'm approaching the topic today a little bit differently. Most of you probably know that usually when I do Strong and MBTI webinars, I tend to focus on the complexities of interpretation. We talk a lot about personality differentiation and foreclosure and diffusion and those kinds of things. And that's pretty much in line with my philosophy of career counseling. My philosophy is that career counseling is real counseling, that assessments don't provide answers, they suggest points of exploration, and that any assessment is only as effective as the practitioner who's using it. Now, both the strong, yes?
Well, it looks like we aren't seeing your screen anymore. Can you hit the show my screen button? There you are. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Shall I start with this? Let me start with the beginning of this slide. I was talking about my philosophy of career counseling, that career counseling is real counseling, that assessments don't provide answers, they suggest points of exploration, and that any assessment is only as effective as the practitioner who's using it. And both the Strong and the MBTI can be very complex, or they can be deceptively simple. Assessments are practitioners' tools, and they're really only one piece of a comprehensive process. But at the same time, I'm very much aware of some critical trends. I'm talking with people on college campuses all the time, and what I'm hearing is that not all settings can accommodate what real counseling requires. And not all clients, especially younger high school and college students, are what I would refer to as ready for career counseling. They just need some initial points to get started. But lack of readiness doesn't mean that we can't start. And in cases like these, less is often more. So today I'm going to give you the less and only bring in the more in response to your questions and discussion points. And I'm going to be pausing at several points. I think there are 4 different points during the webinar where I think questions might come up. So please be sure to send in your questions. And I'll give you a little bit of warning before I'm going to stop. The MBTI and Strong assessments each address self-knowledge and career possibilities, but they do it very differently. They complement and enrich each other. You can allude to the whole picture with just one or the other, but some of the actual pieces might be missing. The MBTI picks up natural preferences. It looks internally. These are preferences that are as natural to us as handedness or eye dominance. We can predict what clients would enjoy doing from their natural inclinations. Its interpretation is based on the theoretical model of Carl Jung, and it sorts people into 16 discrete patterns of personality. Just a quick note here, although natural personality types don't change, type does tend to develop and integrate over the lifespan, so it might show up differently on the reports that we get. So we're in no way limited to our natural type. Now the strong reflects what we know about, what we enjoy doing. John Holland's theoretical framework is the glue that ties the parts of the inventory together. The scales are normative and empirical and generate standard scores that compare respondents with people in general. Excuse me. The scales on the strong are normative and empirical and generate standard scores that compare respondents with people in general and workers in representative occupations. Christine, will you just do a double check with me? Is everything coming through visually?
Yep, everything looks great.
Okay. Just to make it simple, the MBTI addresses the career exploration question, who am I? The strong addresses the question, what do I want to do? And in a perfect world, who we are and what career field we're in or aspiring to are the same thing. What I found over the years is that almost every client or student will start with the what question. I tend to begin my career counseling discussions with some general questions. Why are you here? What kind of outcome do you expect? Things like that. And they tend to answer to find out what career or college major I should choose to find a job. I don't think I can remember even one person who ever said to me to find out who I am when I ask those questions, at least not at the beginning of our work together. Sometimes later on they'll suggest that they'd like to learn more about themselves, but not at the beginning. I worked in an interdisciplinary clinical practice for nearly 20 years, and the therapists used to tell me that their patients were the who people. My clients were the what people. And to put it simply, those who know who they are have a much easier time with the career counseling process than those who don't. The who just has to come first, and most career counseling settings that you're working in don't have time to spend the 6 to 12 hours that I had to spend with each client in our clinical practice. All we can do is look for some easy places to start, and that's what we're going to do today. Using the Strong and MBTI assessments is like putting the pieces of a puzzle together. Sometimes the pieces fit, sometimes they don't. Sometimes one assessment addresses the presenting concern, sometimes the other, and sometimes we need both. I'm going to pause briefly at the end of this slide, by the way, before I get into the assessments more deeply. So if you have any questions, you can send them kind of while I'm talking. Which assessment to use depends on the circumstances. The MBTI tends to be the first choice when self-awareness is vague, when the who is missing. Interests are not stated, not just career interests, but any interests. This is the person who, when you say, what do you like to do, they say, I don't know. The MBTI is usually their first choice when the issues are more work adjustment than they are career exploration. Now, the strong is usually the first choice when students or clients are self-aware and they're looking for specific options. Respondents are exploring organizational settings, or employers are suggesting customer markets. Personally, this is just my personal preference, I tend to administer the MBTI almost always. No matter why the client is taking assessments, type is helpful. And if the who piece isn't addressed, the what piece just isn't going to happen. Now, the MBTI suggests how I should present information to respondents, what language to use, how to frame expectations, how to present the assessments. Working with ESFP and INTJ types is like speaking two different languages, and we have to be fluent in both and know when to use which. So starting with the MBTI gives us that lead-in. Type gives me a framework for evaluating every concern that's shared from that point forward. It gives me something to go on when interests are not developed and the strong is flat. The middle two letters tell me what's really most valued by the client, even if what they are telling me is they want money, they want security. It's a really good place to start with very young students who are just forming their identity. And it's the instrument of choice when working with adults who have work adjustment issues, getting along with colleagues, supervisors, customers, things like that. Now the strong is going to be most helpful with high school students planning for college students who are exploring majors, and anyone who is exploring a potential change to a different career field. It works best when respondents are already somewhat self-aware. I also use it frequently with adults who are in transition and with employees who are exploring different opportunities with their current employer in their current setting. And it's also used for employers who are assigning sales staff to different customer markets. Now because I think the who has to come first, we're going to look at type first today. But before we do that, I just want to check and see if there are any questions that have come in around what I put out there so far.
No, Judy, we don't have any questions just yet.
Okay, thanks, Eugenia. Oh, Janae, I'm sorry. These are the 4 pairs of preferences that the MBTI assessment talks about. Part of using the tool is providing feedback on respondents' results to verify type. We define what preferences are and make sure that respondents understand that we use all 8, but we tend to naturally prefer one of the over in each pair. Then we explain the preference pairs, and we have respondents choose which pole in each pair is most natural for them, and compare their choices with reported results. So we're actually looking at what they say their type is after we've discussed the 4 preference pairs and comparing that with their reports, and that's how we verify the type. Now EI and JP are orientations. They describe how we behave. SN and TF are the cognitive functions, the mental processes. They're the heart of type. Together, they are what define who we are. The functions, SN and TF, describe how we process information, how we evaluate its worth, the criteria we use to make decisions. They're the who. They directly suggest college majors and career fields. The orientations, EI and JP, describe where we get the energy to engage the functions and how we prefer to live our daily lives. They describe how we do things. And with the functions, the orientations suggest very specific positions within career fields. When we're beginning the career exploration process, we begin with the functions, the heart of type, the SN and TF combinations. When we're making it simple, that's often as far as we have to go. Then we bring in EI and JP to describe preferred work environments and work style. Here is the essence of each of the pairs of functions, each of the columns of the type table, the 4 hearts of type, and what drives each one toward career and life satisfaction. And note the precision of ST compared to the other 3, which says something about the language that you're using when you're providing feedback to ST types. Now it's from this heart of type information that we can generalize to college majors and career preparation. Now once clients identify more with one function pair over the others, Introduction to Type in Careers or the MBTI Career Report will narrow it down to specific job titles. Now this is the beginning of career exploration. Once respondents are comfortable with this heart of type information, you can bring in the nuances of EI and JP, the pace of the workplace, and how the work is done. But remember, if you're starting the exploration process, it's about the who am I and what career fields does who I am relate to. And that's why we tend to, when we don't have much time, we start with the heart of type, because that can take us directly to a path for exploration. And this gets a little nuancy when you bring in these other two dichotomies or preference pairs. Now, once you've discussed it, and I'm going to pause for a minute to talk about your questions related to the MBTI. Once you have discussed the preference pairs with students, you can go to the career report. Here's a sample page from the career report for ENFJ, the career report for ESTP, or you can go to Introduction to Type and Careers for specifics. Now, this is absolutely the simplest approach to the MBTI, and some of you are saying, what, my gosh, I spend an hour just verifying type with students. And what I'm hearing more and more often is that they feel like the MBTI is too complicated for their time frame, and so this gives you a really simple starting point, and is often all they need, especially if you're doing academic advising. Now, I'm going to take the same approach to the Strong in a minute, but before I do that, let's see if any questions have come in on this piece.
Hi, Judy. We do have one question. The question is, if most of the preference pairs are close, does this mean they are flexible or not yet self-aware?
Really good question, and of course that gets into the complexity of the instruments. The only thing that slight preferences tell us is that when answering the questions on the MBTI, there wasn't any consistency. The person was answering in one direction and the other direction. This can mean a lot of things. It usually doesn't mean flexibility, and this may generate some discussion, but flexibility on the MBTI comes from knowing your natural preference and knowing when it's not appropriate to use it and to go to the other side. And that comes from control, not from not from lack of awareness over which the natural preference is. If your type prefers intuition, and you're approaching a project that requires specific data and tasks, if you're not aware of what your preference is, it's going to be more of a challenge for you to set those tasks up, jump into that frame of mind, and function that way. If you're not clear about your preference, if you're clear about your intuition preference, for instance, and you know that this project requires a sensing approach, you can say, all right, we're going to work towards the big picture, and I've got the big picture in my mind, but I'm putting that down right now, and we're going to take a more linear step-by-step approach. I have to use my sensing, and that comes from type development. And of course, I don't think we really go through that dialogue in our minds. It's almost automatic. Once you know your preference, you can look at information and just automatically move into intuition or sensing, depending on what the situation calls for. But that comes from awareness of the natural processes, the natural functions, and being able to control them cognitively. I hope that didn't get too complex, because that's really, we discuss that a lot in the webinars we do on verifying type with challenging profiles and things like that.
Thanks, Judy. We have one more question. This individual has used the Step 2 Form Q interpretive report whenever possible, but has also used the Form M interpretive report for college. Are there any pros and cons for either high school, junior high, etc.?
Well, yeah, with me, it's always the pro and con has to do with time constraints. I think that if you're using the Step 2 in a high school or college setting, your students are really fortunate that that you have the time to give them, because the Step 2 provides a lot of depth to understanding the four-letter type. I'm not sure about using it in high school, and to be honest with you, I never have. I've used it in college frequently, and certainly with I almost always use it with adults. The approach to using it, though, is to begin by verifying the 4-letter type. So the step 2 doesn't even come into the discussion until the 4-letter type has been verified. So I'll very often verify the 4-letter type. Once I have a verified 4-letter type, I might generate the career report based on that, or the interpretive report for college based on that. Then I'll bring in the step 2 facets, the subscales, to talk about specific behaviors within the 4-letter type. But I think the only con to using the step 2 for me is if it's too much information. And what I'm finding with younger students, especially college students right now, is that they want less information and more conclusions. It's kind of the tell me the answer, don't give me the process. And so if I overwhelm them with too much information in the beginning, I might lose them. So I tend to start with a simpler approach and then bring in the step 2 when it's necessary. I love it, though.
Thanks, Judy. Do we have time for one more question?
Sure. Yeah. No, we do. Definitely.
Okay, so this individual had 2 employees come in for a verification of type for transitioning to a reduced load, and both had a hard time choosing their preference pairs in EI, SN, or TF. How best would you help them when they are in such a transitional period?
Well, first of all, the three pairs that you described are the most important pairs. That's the who am I and where the energy comes from to live who you are. The JP is just how you implement who you are in your daily life. And most people, when they're in a transition period in an employment setting, will respond to JP out of the mindset of their employer. So if the employer is suggesting a J approach or a P approach to work, that's kind of how they respond to it. But when the other 3 are not clear, you have to deal with it. Well, first of all, I'm going to start with SN and TF because that's the harder type, and just put EI aside. And I'm going to backtrack and see what the instructions were when they took the instrument, first of all. I want to make sure that they were adequately guided to responding according to their natural type and not according to how they think they should behave or how people around them behave or what their employer expects. So you want to make sure that they understand that the questions are asking you to choose which comes more naturally. And with SN, I always explain to them that when processing information and experiencing life, which is what SN is all about, we always do both. You can't. It's one never excludes the other. What a preference for S over N or N over S tells us is where we automatically go first. So you as an N might go to N immediately, and then quickly move to pull in the facts. And once the person knows that that they're free to go both ways, they can usually say, well, my brain goes here first. And the same thing is true of TF. Again, the adequate explanation of these are the criteria that we turn to first when we're deciding which information is the most important to hold on to. So all of this information comes to us and all of these life experiences, and we're S-ing and N-ing all over the place. And the TF is what our brain naturally goes to first to say, this is most important to me. This is personally meaningful, or this fits my logical system. And again, we go back and forth in every decision-making process. But the brain will automatically start in one place, and that's all the MBTI is telling us is what the starting place is. Usually when I have that kind of a discussion with someone whose preferences in the middle are unclear, they'll say, well, I'm clearly sensing, but that's what I do when I'm not at work. But this job requires me to work within a big picture framework. And so when I answer the questions, I kind of was unclear and I was going back and forth. That's the kind of discussion you want to have. Once you reach some clarity on one of those 2 preferences, then I bring EI in because that's where the energy comes from to use those preferences. And it's for me, it's usually just that kind of open discussion of having the client tell you how they use each of the functions, and then saying, where do you go first? And it's sometimes it takes you're describing people in transition are going to be experiencing stress, and they could very possibly be responding to you out of the other side of their type. You don't know that, and that's why it takes some time to sort that stuff through. I know that's a complicated answer. The bottom line, making it simple, is it's all about the discussion you have and making the employee feel comfortable discussing what's most natural for them with you. Long answer, Anjane, I'm sorry.
That was great. Thanks, Judy. Okay, and then there's one more, Judy, but did you want to proceed?
No, it's okay. I allowed for time to talk about the MBTI, and then we'll do the same thing with the Strong.
Okay, perfect. So in employment situations, could problems with preference clarity be an issue of fear of responding differently than corporate culture?
Sure. Sure. I mean, that's there are all kinds of things that that result in unclear types, and that's that's definitely one of them.
Okay, and I think we addressed all of the questions, Judy.
Okay. We'll come back to some things about the MBTI later. And just as a reminder, we've done several webinars on verifying unclear types. I do a lot of work around type dynamics and how type dynamics is useful in verifying type. And going back to the previous question where JP was clear, when JP is clear and they verify it, you know what they extrovert. And that's such a huge clue when you're talking them through the preferences. And past webinars are in the CPP archives, in the Knowledge Center archives. So sometimes it's helpful to go back and just review some of those that we've done on the more complex questions. We're going to talk about the Strong a little bit. This is just a review. The MBTI and the Strong provide different kinds of information for the career exploration process. Most important to the career counseling process is that the MBTI looks internally and the Strong looks externally. We can't like something on the Strong that we don't know about. Whereas on the MBTI, we can be something, we can have a natural preference for something without having had exposure to as much as the Strong might suggest that you need to have. I'm going to talk about the Strong a little bit, and then we're going to boil it down to, again, making it simple. This is California. The Strong includes over 160 scales that flow from the very broad to the specific. Everything on the Strong starts with 6 general occupational themes. We call them the GOTS. I like to think of them as the state in which I live. They describe general personality and work environment characteristics, and they overlap quite a bit with the 4 hearts of type, which we're going to look at in a minute. Now the basic interest scales, we call them the BIZs, break the general occupational themes down into 30 specific interest areas, which correlate directly to college majors and career fields. Think of the BIZs as the city or town in which you live. Now the BIZs are further broken down into 130 occupational scales, the OSSs, and they link the Strong reports directly to ONET, and they serve as the gateway to the entire world of work. I think of the OSSs kind of like a street address, so we're really getting narrow and focused. All of these scales, the GOTS, the BIZs, the OSSs, are coded with 6 RIASEC themes, R-I-A-S-E-C. Those are the themes of John Holland. And those are followed by 5 PIZs, the personal style scales. I think of those as how we like to decorate our home. So we've got broad themes, then we narrow them down into narrow or specific interests, and then very specific target occupations, then how we go about approaching those occupations. The Strong's general occupational themes are based on Holland's theory of person-environment fit. There's 6 categories of work environments that are made up of the people who are in them. The 6 themes are arranged around a hexagon that looks like this. When we talk about it, we start in the upper left-hand corner. That's why we call it reassec. We're progressing around to the right. You could probably start anywhere, but it's harder to pronounce, I think. The theory says that the categories next to each other have overlapping characteristics. So R and I, for instance, have much more in common with each other than R and S do. The categories opposite each other are actually very different. They pull against each other. And one of the complexities of the strong is when someone comes up with an RS code or a CA code or an IE code, because they're saying, I like 2 opposite things. And very often, by the way, they will also, on their hearts of type, have PCI, preference clarity index, is very close to the middle. Now, most personalities and work environments are made up of 2 or 3 of the adjoining letters from the hexagon. Now, just for fun, see if you can match up the hearts of type with the general occupational themes. Remember, the hearts of type describe who we are. The themes describe what we like doing. And of course, there are only 4 hearts of type and there's 6 themes, so you might link a couple of the hearts of type more than once. But just, I'll give you a minute or two. See if you can put a heart of type with each one of those themes. Okay, these are the most common matchups of personality and interests, at least at the simplest of levels. Check it out and see how many of those agree with what you thought. Now, if you only have 20 minutes to do academic or career advising with a student, I'm not sure that you'd use both assessments. It's easier, really, to either verify the middle 2 letters of type, as we talked about earlier, or to connect some pieces of the strong, which we're going to talk about next. Remember, I said at the very beginning that each of these instruments can be deceptively simple, as this slide appears, or very complex. Now, I'm going to mention just a couple of the complexities when you're using the 2 together. And when you look at this slide, I don't want you to think that all people who score high on realistic on the strong have ST preferences, or all people who score high on the social theme on the strong have SF preferences. These tend to be the typical matchups. They're the significant matchups in the research. They happen more frequently than other matchups. But you're going to get almost any type in any theme. You're just going to approach it a little bit differently. I think the enterprising theme is interesting. In the research, all 16 types tend to be attracted to the enterprising theme. The extroverted types more so than the introverted types. I suspect that it's because enterprising is so associated with corporate environments, and there's a place for every type in every organization. The complexity comes when individuals say that they like enterprising, and you ask what they want to do, and they don't know. They just want to work in that fast-paced business world and make a lot of money, but they don't really have any idea of what they want to do in that world. There's one piece of concrete information that comes up over and over and over again, and that's that when INFP types self-select into enterprising work environments, they pretty much get eaten up. It's a tough match. INFP types are very good at playing roles and adopting personas, and it works for a while, but not for a lifetime. Another complexity comes from the similarity up at the top of the hexagon, the similarity between these 2 R and I themes, and sometimes it's hard for students especially to differentiate between those 2. Both can be related to engineering, for instance, but investigative engineering is more conceptual, more N. Realistic engineering is more experimental, more sensing. This is one of the reasons that verifying respondents' MBTI types can be critical, and why the order of the strong themes is so important. Sometimes I'll be working with practitioners who have been using the RIASEC model for a long time, especially if they've been using the self-directed search or the brief assessment on internet, and they'll switch the letters in the themes. You don't do that on the strong. The letters in the themes on the strong are only interchangeable when scores are very close together. And we always want to keep in mind that the MBTI is more about who the person is, and the strong is more about what they might be interested in doing. So you're going to get some type-theme mismatches. For instance, an NT who comes up with social interests. They want to help others, but the NT describes how they want to help others. The NT social combination, for instance, is more analytical and theoretical than an ESFJ social worker or career counselor might be. And when I see what appear to be drastic mismatches, the most drastic one is ST artistic. I spend some time verifying both the type and the themes, and then I put it in their hands. I can't tell them what it means. I have to ask them. So I might say something like, you seem to be very accurate and precise, and you've indicated that you like structure and order and clear instructions to follow. At the same time, you've expressed considerable interest in career fields that tend to be creative, unconventional, idealistic, self-expressive. How do you think that might play out for you? And sometimes they have answers that work. One of my favorite clients was a stained glass artist that did massive murals made out of tiny pieces of glass the size of my little pinky finger nail. And these murals were corporate murals for walls and lobbies that were the size of football fields. They were gigantic. And what he did was he took these tiny pieces of glass and he triple beveled them by hand. And then he assembled them from an architect's blueprint, a type of a diagram. It would take him a year to complete a mural, and he was paid a lot for his work. So he's an example. He was an ST artistic type, clearly. But most often, this will be a flag that they haven't explored. You're going to have to do some in-depth work. It's a flag for deeper discussion, and that's when you have to let in the complexities of these instruments. Now, I thought I'd show you the very most common overlaps, and I wanted to show you this because INFP artistic has always been interesting to me because it stands out. I don't think I've ever seen an INFP type who didn't have artistic in his or her strong theme code, and it's usually in the first position. In other words, INFP types need the opportunity for personal self-expression in their work. If they're doing art, that's great. There's a match. But if they're not doing art, they need to be able to treat their work as if it were art. That's why counseling and therapy are such a natural fit for them, and why enterprising career fields just aren't. Now, I mentioned earlier that the scales on the strong go from the very broad, the GOTS, to the very specific, the occupational scales, and then we add the personal style scales. The complexity of the strong comes from combining the GOTS, the BISs, and the ASs, and since they're normed differently, they don't always agree. When we use the strong at a simpler level, we focus on the general occupational themes and the basic interest scales. And I'm going to use a case study to kind of show you how I do this. This is Sam. Sam is a young man from Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe is a small resort community where I live. He works on the ski slopes as a groomer and does contract snow removal during the winter and works for the Forest Service during the summer. He's a typical Lake Tahoe resident. He's taken some general education classes at the community college, and he's now thinking about going ahead with his education. He's 22. The college has an excellent hospitality management program that includes an option for certification as a professional chef. And when we first started talking, that was what he said he wanted to do. You're looking at his strong GOTS and BIZs. The strong basic interest scales point directly to career fields and academic majors, and culinary arts is right there. But notice that artistic is way down on his GOTS. And what that suggests is that although he has an idea of something he thinks he would like to do, a clear sense of what, it isn't a good fit for who he is. As an aside, his MBTI type is ISTP, and ISTP and realistic tend to validate each other. Now we're not going to focus on Sam's occupational scales, but you can see here that he isn't very similar to typical chefs either. I'm going to pause after the next slide if you have questions that you want to ask about the strong. Back to this again. When we're looking at the first level of strong results, without getting complicated, we look for BIZs that match up with respondents' GOTS. A BIZ that stands alone, just something they've been exposed to, but it's not lining up. You can see here that Sam has several realistic BIZs, and culinary arts isn't one of them. I'm going to show you in a minute how we proceeded with Sam using the iStartStrong report. Before we do that, I wanted to see if there are any questions about the strong.
We do have a few questions.
Good.
The first one, do you know the rationale for the Ryersek order in Holland's theory?
The rationale comes from research. The themes that are next to each other on the hexagon are the themes that correlate with each other the most. And the themes that are opposite are the themes that correlate with each other the least. So that's it, just comes from the data. And Holland's research is making vocational choices a theory of personality and work environments, and all the schematics and diagrams are in that show the research over the years. And interestingly, we teach this a lot in the certification program, interestingly, in all Western countries, the hexagon plays out the same way. It's the correlations are sometimes greater or larger, but they're still in that order.
Okay, great. And then the second question, this individual recently administered the strong, and the code came back with just one letter, which was R. Is this a frequent occurrence?
Well, you'd have to define frequent, but it happens. It certainly happens. The strong will only show, on the full strong report, like we're looking at here, the only letters that show up in that little bar up here that says your theme code, the only letters that are going to appear here are letters that are at least moderate when compared with people in general. This one is almost there. Realistic is very high. It depends really on what you've been exposed to. And if life is perfect, little children from the time that they're walking around and experiencing things are given the opportunity to experience all 6 kinds of activities, all kinds of environments. And what happens if they do that up through 8th, 9th grade, we're talking maybe 2 years old through 9th grade, if parents and communities and friends allow that and encourage it, then 1, 2, or 3 themes will begin to emerge as higher. But if they tend to be isolated, I told you about Lake Tahoe, I live in an R town. Everybody, they talk R, they dress R, they walk R, and they all have trucks and snowmobiles and skis. I mean, this is an R town. And Sam was raised here, and R is all he's ever done for work. And so I see more of that one code stuff here than I do in a city, for instance, where they're exposed to a lot more.
Okay, thanks, Judy. How would you explain an INFJ with a social GOT listed first?
Well, for social, I think I said SF is more common. but NF is also very common with the social theme. What's important to me about INFJ social is that INFJ's extrovert feeling, and that means that helping others, empowering others, guiding others is a very strong, it's what they do, it's a strong motivator. That's that NF thing. But because they extrovert feeling, they can also be kind of pulled into a caretaking mode, which isn't what INFJ is about. INFJ is about using creativity to empower others to grow and develop. And through the empowerment of others, they grow and develop themselves. So they need to be in a social work setting where it's not micromanaged, where there are not a lot of specifics to follow, where they can use their creativity and how they're going to be helpful to others. It's much more empowerment than it is more the social work model of caretaking and providing services. I feel like I'm working with horoscopes, Anjane.
Okay, so here's another one, Judy. I work with first-generation low-income college students with limited experience. Can you comment on the validity of the strong based on that?
Well, we have to go back to the strong. The strong is based on what you know about. And Holland, when he was writing his theory back in the 1950s, said if you don't know about it, by the time you're old enough to take a career assessment, you probably wouldn't like it. I like to, in an intake interview, when I first meet with somebody, I use a hexagon. I put a hexagon right out there on the table, and I describe each of the 6 corners. This is before they take the strong. And I briefly describe each corner of the hexagon, and I ask them what they know about each corner. Do they watch TV programs? That are related to the 6 corners? Do they play video games? Do they do stuff outdoors? What about experience they've had in school? What do they know about people who work? And I'm trying to find out if they at least know about the 6 categories. And first-generation students, college students, will know less, but they'll still know. And what happens is the strong becomes an educational tool rather than a prescriptive tool. And what you're doing is sharing with them what you know about the world of work and about what you know about education, which is more important at that point than actually coming up with an answer. With those students, I'm going to back up and use the MBTI. It's a slam dunk for me. I want to know who they were meant to be, and then I can relate that to the hexagon as I'm talking about it.
Okay, and here's another one, Judy. What does it mean when a person's strong code are not adjacent? Example, if they come out as an ISC.
Okay. I had to actually look at it myself. ISC, what's going on with ISC is that they're skipping a letter between each of their codes. When you have 3, if they're all, especially if they're higher than moderate, if they're high or very high, or if they're 3 moderate and everything else is little, when every other code letter comes up in your type, you want the whole hexagon, because they all correlate with each other. And so when you get a code like that, first of all, you're going to have someone with lots of interests, possibly multi-potential talents. It's going to be, the decision making is going to be harder. It's going to be more challenging, because how do you choose one over the other when you want them all? And it's going to be the practitioner's job to help them to understand that what we're doing with career exploration is defining a starting point. And if you want the whole hexagon, then we just want to define where you're going to start. And once you start and get on your way, you'll get the whole hexagon. You just can't have it all in your first job. ISC, that's an unusual one, by the way.
Okay, great. And then this,
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Judy.
No, I was thinking out loud. I shouldn't do that.
I have a 2-part question for you. You indicated that the order of the letter codes matter when the top 2 codes are within a point or 2. How does this affect the interpretive report? And then are there any particular issues to be aware of in sharing the results with these clients?
The interpretive report can only go with numbers. And the interpretive report always has a practitioner behind it. So what the interpretive report does is start with the highest, and then there are a couple of the highest code statistically, and then there are a couple of paragraphs that are inserted that say, rather than RI, you may identify more with IR. See your career practitioner. And that's when you have to talk about it. That's when you pull out Where Do I Go Next, the booklet that goes with the Strong, and you review it to see what the order is. I mean, when I may have misled some of you. When I said the order of the themes for the Strong is important, you can't switch them. Statistically, you can't switch them unless they're 5 points or less apart. That's less than a half of the standard deviation. But that doesn't mean the client can't switch them. I mean, if Sam, we're looking at Sam here, now he's clearly RI. If he had come to me and we had gone through this and he had said, I don't care what that says, I'm IR, the student's always right. The client's always right. At least you have to make them feel like they're always right and guide them to a full exploration to confirm that they're right. I hope that answered the question. That's a tough one. Let's, Ajane, let's one more question, and then I'm going to run through one more piece on the Strong.
Okay, perfect. So this individual has seen GOTs where one theme has a higher STD score but is listed below another theme. Do you know why?
Oh, I love it. It's my favorite question. Okay, we're going to get a little bit technical. What you've got over here, these are standard scores. And they're based on a normal curve, a bell curve, where 50 is the mean and standard deviations are 10. What that means is that a score of 70 is a very high interest compared to everybody. That's like the 98th plus percentile. So those are the standard scores. The ordering of these is based on how your standard score compares to your gender. So this standard score over here says that compared to men, Sam scored very high. And compared to men, he scored pretty much where they do. And in the other 4 areas, compared to men, little interest. And that's also showing up in the standard scores over here. But what will sometimes happen is the first bar will be shorter, the second bar will be longer. For instance, a female who scores on realistic a 53 and scores 55 on social. So we've got a 53 on realistic and a 55 on social. So over here, they're not lining up. But over here, over here, then you can see that realistic is a lower number than social. But realistic is going to be listed first. That bar is going to show up first because compared to women who score low on realistic to begin with, her score of 53 is considered high. Whereas the score of 54 or 55 on social is considered moderate. So, easy answer, standard scores come from a comparison of both genders, and the bars come from a comparison just with your own gender. So you get to interpret it both ways. Ajane, did I just jumble that completely, or did you follow?
No, I followed, Judy. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Okay. Should we go on? Should we finish up Sam, and then we'll come back to some more questions?
Yes.
Okay. You might have, if you know the iStartStrong report at all, you might have seen that he's a really good candidate for this report. This report is probably the simplest way to approach the Strong by itself when you're not using an MBTI with it. The report does not require interpretation by a qualified practitioner. Certainly recommended that you know the Strong thoroughly and that you know RIASEC, etc. But it's not required. And it does leave that door open if necessary. So after completing the Strong, You, the practitioner, can arrange to have the results sent directly to the client, or they can come to the practitioner. And in this case, I wanted to review the results first, so I had them come to me first. Now, behind the scenes of this report, I had also scored the full report because I'm a strong junkie, so I'm always going to score a strong report. But I didn't want Sam to be overloaded with all of that information. Now, once I had reviewed this iStartStrong report, I forwarded the PDF of the report to Sam with instructions for him to read through it and explore the links that I'm going to show you. And then we made arrangements to talk about the results together. Sam really liked this report because it was so interactive and hands-on. Of course, that goes with his realistic. Not surprisingly, when he linked to learn more down here, when he linked to learn more, he identified right away with the realistic descriptors. This, by the way, is not a part of the report. This piece resides on the CPP Career Exploration platform. So the student or the client has to have the active PDF on their screen to actually make the links work. Excuse me, I've kind of messed up here. I apologize. Thought I had all that sorted out. Now, he wasn't as excited about the investigative theme. I'm going to see if I can link to that. Things aren't linking right. I'm very much apologize. He wasn't excited about the investigative theme, but he could see parts of himself in the description. We talked about this a lot. He couldn't see himself doing laboratory work or working in a university setting, but he could see himself researching information to solve problems. One of the things that he does in his winter snow removal job is to service and fix snowblowers. He thinks it's really fun to tackle a snowblower that he's never seen before. He goes online, finds the schematics, he does what has to be done, and then he tries it out to see if it works. That's a very RI approach rather than IR. I actually had him work on one of my snowblowers that was nearly 15 years old, and the dealer had told me it wasn't worth fixing. And we're talking about a nearly $5,000 machine here, so I wasn't anxious to run out and buy a new one. And once Sam got a hold of it, it gave me another 3 years before it finally went belly up. It did go belly up. And so what happened, Sam took the parts and he's using them on other people's snowmobiles now. Now, since Sam was also interested in a fairly creative field, culinary arts, I also asked him to look at the artistic theme description. He didn't relate to it very much at all. But he did see a process very much like researching how to fix a snowblower, researching how to prepare a dish, and then trying it out. That's how he goes about culinary arts. And this gave us the opportunity to talk about employment and money and the concerns that young people living in Lake Tahoe have. If he got training to repair equipment, for instance, he could be pretty much assured of employment and a decent income. Training as a chef in Lake Tahoe, he'd probably have to leave the lake and relocate to one of the cities that's better known for fine dining. He'd also have to have quite a few years at a pretty low income. Was that okay with him? This is where you have to know your client a little bit. Young people in my town work to ski and be on the lake. Skiing and being on the lake are a much higher value for them than finding passion in their work. And he wasn't about to relocate, and he wasn't about having a regular job that would keep him off the slopes now or 10 years from now. And I know that because the 50-year-olds who live here feel the same way. It isn't the ideal place to open up a practice as a private career counselor. I found that out in a hurry and had to find something else to do with my life when I moved here. Now next, Sam looked at his top 5 specific interests, and this is where it got really interesting. This is on the full Strong report. These are called basic interest scales. Note that for the themes and the basic interest scales on the iStartStrong report, excuse me, there aren't any scales and scores to explain. So that problem we had with the bars and the standard scores on the full report, you don't have to deal with that because the iStartStrong report just puts it aside. That's what makes it simple. The top themes and specific interests will always be presented as such, the client's top ones. There isn't any discussion of normative referencing in this report. Respondents aren't focusing on whether their interests are high or low. Their top 5 specific interests are their top 5, and that's all that's important. Now, Sam looked at culinary arts first and didn't really need to explore much further. It just didn't appeal to him when considered as a career. But he did click, let me see if I can make it work, he clicked on the chef job title just to learn more about it. It connected with ONET. Excuse me, I'm going to mute and get a sip of water. I apologize. I've described Lake Tahoe a little bit in this webinar. It's very dry up here, especially when it's only 8 degrees out, which it is right now. And he was particularly interested in learning about wages and employment and things like that. And what's really great about ONET is you can scroll down through a lot of information about chefs. And eventually, you're going to come down here, close your eyes, to wages and employment trends. He could click on California and go right there and find out what the occupational profile is in California and how California wages stack up against national wages. And he looked at that and not really impressive. Now, Sam explored all of his other top interest areas and was especially drawn to mechanics and construction, protective services, and nature and agriculture. He found some interesting pieces in each and researched them thoroughly. I'm not going to take you through all of the information, but I'll show you the path that took him to where he ended up. Mechanics and construction linked to the CPP Career Exploration Platform, where he zeroed in on construction management and civil engineering. The college has associate degree and certificate programs in both of these areas, so he saw those as a possibility for him. Forestry is huge in Lake Tahoe, so he was naturally drawn to anything to do with forestry, ecology, the environment, things under nature and agriculture. He was particularly excited to learn that many graduates of the college's Civil Engineering Technology program go to work for the Forest Service and other environmental agencies in the lake and in the lake basin. Now, at first, he wasn't even going to look at protective services. But when he saw firefighting, he got excited. What I didn't share with you earlier is that his risk-taking scores on the full strong was 66. That's a very high risk-taking score, and it fits with firefighting. Now, as you scroll down the ONET page, this is firefighting. As he scrolled down the ONET page, he found forest firefighters under related occupations. And I'm going to close your eyes. I'm going to take you down there. The very bottom, we get to related occupations, and here's forest firefighters, and that little sun next to it says there's a bright outlook for forest firefighters, especially in Lake Tahoe. And when we click on that, it takes us to the ONET information about forest firefighting. Now, what we noticed in this, first of all, they have a fire science major at the college, so for him, this was really important. Here's the bright outlook again. And I'm going to scroll down on this page, look away, because I want to show you what was really important to him was the education. That what this was saying was he doesn't need a lot of education to go into forest firefighting. Everything about the job appealed to him, something that it never even came up in our conversations about being a chef. His whole, his whole persona, the way he presented, the way he talked, was excited as we scrolled through this information together. And of course, Sam and I, by now, were talking about his report, and we'd also briefly covered his ISTP type, very briefly. Now, the next steps were for him to investigate courses and majors at the college. And I thought it would also be good for him to do some information interviewing, which is easy in a small town where everyone knows everyone else. Between us, we actually know several firefighters and Forest Service workers, two who are actually firefighters for the Forest Service. And one thing he found out that really appealed to him was that the work is seasonal in Lake Tahoe. He really liked that because it would give him his winters free to work on the slopes, which is, I mean, that's the way people think in this town. We also knew people who owned construction companies, and I just had my property surveyed, so I knew a surveyor for him to talk to, which is related to civil engineering and construction. And Sam's mother works for the Regional Planning Agency and knows people in every area of environmental science up here. So Sam started out with a more or less casual question about careers. He was interested but not overly motivated. I mean, he was happy as long as he could ski. He saw a career as just a bunch of jobs that would keep him near the lake and on the slopes. That was all he knew, except for a developing interest in restaurant work. I think I mentioned that Sam was 22, and it eventually came out in our discussion that his girlfriend was studying to become a chef. In fact, she's applying to the Culinary Institute of America and will probably go to their Napa campus next year. And I don't know about you, but I've found that this isn't unusual for young adults who are trying to figure out who they are. They very often become interested in what the people that are close to them in their lives are interested in. We talked about that a lot. Now, it turned out that Sam didn't need a lengthy discussion of his assessment results. He wasn't complicated, and the assessment results weren't complicated. All he needed was a tool to get started and a little bit of direction. We could have wound up in the same place with either instrument. It didn't matter. Because I already knew that he was a hands-on type of person, I chose to have him work more with iStartStrong than with the MBTI assessment. And I think we're going to go on with some specific information from CPP, but before that, this might be a good place to stop and pick up some miscellaneous questions if they've come in.
Yes, we do have a couple, Judy. So
Okay.
the first one, I recently did a strong assessment with an alumni who doesn't identify as male or female. This posed a challenge for me as it forced my clients to make a choice they weren't totally comfortable with regarding their gender, which then tainted the rest of the process. Do you have any advice?
Well, the first question is to ask them if they do self-select into one gender or the other when they initially take it. If they don't, have them choose one and then score it for both. Just score it twice. And you can go over similarities and differences between the genders as you work through the process. There's some cases like that, and I know that our certification trainer, Cheryl, is much more experienced with this issue, and she may share some comments here too that Anjane can share with us. But sometimes it's more comfortable to use an instrument that isn't gender referenced. But when it is, then just double score it.
Okay, then the next question, what's the value of scoring the full report behind using the iStartStrong?
Well, if you're a certified practitioner on the Strong, there are a lot of nuances that come out of the scores. It's with iStartStrong, if you score moderate on scales and they're your highest, they just show up as your highest. Whereas you know when you look at a full report that they're really only average scores. You also have, on the full report, you have the occupational scales, you have the personal style scales. So when things aren't consistent, when you get occupations that don't agree with basic interest scales, that's a flag. If someone says, I really like culinary arts and I want to be a chef, and culinary arts is high and chef is off the charts low, then they're saying I like, but they're not similar to typical people who do that kind of work. So you have those advantages. You also have all kinds of administrative indexes on the full report that kind of show you the mindset of the person when they answered the questions. But it depends. And we started this whole thing by saying that if a person isn't ready for all that information, or you don't have time, or you don't have money, or whatever your constraints are, you want a place to start. And iStart and the MBTI both give you starting places.
Thanks, Judy. Here's another question. Can you walk through an undecided college student, especially the short attention span millennial?
Walk through it?
Yes.
A short attention span millennial.
Yes.
I don't know what the walkthrough would be. I'm assuming that you wouldn't have less than 30 minutes with somebody. And what first of all, I don't take short attention span for granted. What I want to do is engage their attention span in whatever modality they're comfortable with. So if I've got, on the Myers-Briggs, if I've got an SP type, for instance, and I mean, you know that in the first 5 minutes that they're in your office because they're fidgeting, I'm going to adjust everything to an SP type and do everything hands-on. Whereas if I've got an NT type that's very analytical, then I'm going to do all the assessments and everything. But the main thing I'm going to do is ask them why they're there, what they want, tell them what I can do, what it's going to take, and are they willing to make an hour's investment or 4 hours or whatever you think it's going to take. I have, some of you have heard this before, but throughout my career I've had people that have shown up in my office and I've said, what are you here for? And they'll say something like, tell me what to do. And I'll say, well, you know, assessments don't really do that. They help us explore, blah, blah, blah. And they'll say, that you're the expert. You tell me what to do. So I'll say, okay, be a funeral director or be a bus driver. You know, I'll pick one of the occupations that on the Strong used to really raise some eyebrows. And they'll say, funeral director, bus driver, why? And I'll say, well, you told me to tell you, and there are always jobs for funeral directors, and you're always going to find a job as a bus driver, and if you want me to tell you, I'll tell you where the jobs are. If that's not what you want to do, then we're probably going to have to do a little bit of exploring. That usually works. It kind of hits them in the face with the reality of this isn't a quick process.
Okay, great. So you mentioned earlier that the Hexagon can be used in a preliminary intake session with a new client before they do the online assessment. Please summarize how you do this. Do you use a booklet?
No, I don't. Actually, I have a blank hexagon, and I have it on a piece of notebook-sized paper, and I explain to them that I'm going to ask them some questions, and I'm going to be taking some notes while they talk. And I explained to them that I'm going to be taking notes around a hexagon that describes 6 basic types of environments. And then when they're talking, I'm just jotting notes. And they're nonsense notes. I mean, I might, under R, I might write the name of a TV show or camping or hunting or something. And under S, it might be went to Sunday school, or, you know, whatever it is. And so what's happening is that hexagon is either filling up or it's not. And I'm looking for those of you who have done work with me before, I'm looking for a couple of things. I'm looking for foreclosure, first of all. Has someone made up their mind, did someone make up their mind what field they were going to go into when they were 4? Or their parents told them what field they were going into when they were 4. And the only thing they've had any exposure to is that field. And that shows up in that kind of a discussion. I'm also looking for diffusion, where they have an equal amount of experience in each corner of the hexagon. I mean, the whole hexagon just explodes. And I know that I'm going to have an issue with decision making and focus. That discussion is usually half an hour. And you frame it in a way that engages the person you're talking to. So, you know, I'll just describe R briefly and say, tell me how you've experienced that in your life. The minute you get them talking, you can see from facial expressions and voice tones what they're most excited about. And then at the close of that, I'll say, would you like to take an assessment that makes this process a little more formal and where we can get some direct indications of possible majors or career preparation or career fields or whatever, they usually say, yeah, why not?
Thanks, Judy. What suggestions do you have for working with students whose strong reports show low to moderate interest and thus do not have high or very high interest? May this suggest depression or a lack of awareness?
Well, for me, the important thing is differentiation. Excuse me, just a minute. Sorry. It's more important to me to be differentiated than it is to be high. So if a person has 1 or 2 or 3 moderates and everything else is little, then their moderate is their personal high. That's fine. I think what you might be referring to is when they respond dislike to so many questions on the strong that nothing is above little. When that's the case, it could be any number of things. It could be depression. It's a depressed profile, but it could be depression. It could be lack of awareness. It could be they just don't want to do this whole process. It could be anything. What I'll usually say to them, if they don't have anything above little, most likely the profile is not interpretable. There's some administrative indexes on the last page that tell you whether it's interpretable. And I'll usually say to them, when you answered the questions, when you actually took the strong, you said dislike to almost all the questions. Talk to me about that. What was going on when you answered the questions? And they might say, you know, my mother made me do it, or I had to do it for a class and I didn't want to, or I didn't like anything. I don't like anything. Well, then that's your clue to investigate a little bit why they don't like anything. Because you want to see if there is depression, if they are depressed, you want to be able to know it and proceed accordingly.
Thanks, Judy.
A couple more questions, Ajane, and then we can move on with some CPP information.
Sounds good. So if an individual has a flat profile as well as a disability, what's the best approach for interpreting an assessment for this type of student?
Well, I don't think any of us use a disability to restrict people. The point is to start with whatever opens up options. So if the strong is flat, I might bring in an MBTI. Because what you want to do is open up options. Once the options have been opened up and put on the table, then the disability comes in. And you either talk about job development, job alteration, or if there are physical or emotional or mental restrictions, that's when they come in. But you never start there. Because if you start there, then everything's scaled down to begin with.
Okay, great. Do you notice any gender difference in STEM related to strong scored?
Any gender differences? To be honest, I haven't. I had to think. I would have to look. In my work now, I'm training counselors now rather than actually doing this work. When I have a case study that I share with you, it's because I have a friend, or I do a little bit of work at the college, so I know some people who want to take these assessments. I don't have the kind of practice you do. I think that would be something that would be great to explore. If you have a core of STEM students, boy, Ajane, I smell a dissertation. Compare male and female scores on investigative and math and science and those kinds of things. That would be great. That would be great. My investigator just got all excited. Let's take one more and then we'll wrap.
Well, this one's pretty simple. They mainly deal with online students. So they wanted to know, is there a best way to do the interpretation? Do you recommend a webinar or using Skype?
Well, the strong, I mean, with the MBTI, you have to have feedback. And any real-time feedback works with the MBTI. I don't recommend email exchanges because you want it real-time. So, go to meeting or anything that, when I do it, if I have a one-on-one, I have a link where I can give them access to my desktop. and I'll have the information about the MBTI dichotomies up, and I'll talk them through it as we're talking, and then I'll actually put their report up and show them their report and verify that way. And I can do the same thing with the Strong. If you have a group, then a webinar, yes, and then they can, someone on the other end can actually project to the group. You can talk them through a group interpretation. We actually have a Strong interpretation that we sell at GS that helps people with that. And if you're using iStartStrong, then that's all web-based. So they take it online, they get their profile online, it's all interpreted online. So it's any technology that works for you. What I'm not good at, I haven't figured it out yet. Those of you who know me, that I'm a whiz at computers, but I can't operate a phone. So I haven't figured out how to do interpretations by phone yet. Not with smartphones, but I think that would be great. That's coming. There's got to be an app for that. Let's a little bit more information, and then if there's time at the end, we can take some more questions. Just as a reminder, both the Strong and the MBTI are restricted psychological assessments, meaning that with the exception of iStartStrong, you do need to be certified or educationally qualified to use them. GS, which is my firm, does Strong certification both online and in Lake Tahoe. We do a program every June in Lake Tahoe, and for the Lake Tahoe program, we give people who are connected with CPP a discount if you've attended the webinar. There's a promotion code there and the website. CPP does MBTI certification programs, public certification, and also on-site. And then we do MBTI certification specifically for career counselors and educators that's online. A couple of webinars coming up. The next one is our Valentine's Day webinar, Exploring MBTI Type Dynamics and Relationships. We did this one last year. It was enormously popular, and I've taken some new direction with it this year. We're going to talk about type dynamics and how types connect and don't connect. And we'll look at romantic relationships, yes, but we're also going to look at collegial and supervisory relationships. And then after that, we're going to look at type development and how that connects with the Strong. So how the Strong and the MBTI are interpreted differently for an 18-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 60-year-old. And the link is the cpp.com/askanexpert for more information. CPP always gives a promotion code for purchasing products. The promotion code for this webinar is Expert1213. It's a 10% discount. Make sure and use it before December 27th, and that's to purchase products. It doesn't apply to international offers. It also doesn't apply to purchasing CEU certificates. And just a reminder, if you're an international customer, cpp.com/global sales will take you to information in your part of the world. There are lots of discussion groups online. CPB Education Team has a LinkedIn group. I have a LinkedIn group for Strong Interest Inventory Practitioners. You can reach us, CPP and us, on Facebook, on Twitter, blog, Pinterest. I think we're all over the place now. Now, Ajane, I think you're going to talk a little bit about certificate information.
Yes. So just so everyone is aware, we do always strive to keep these webinars free of charge since they're a valuable resource to our customers. But in doing so, we needed to start charging for certificate requests starting September 26th. We were getting a lot of requests to fill in-house and in a timely basis. Therefore, we opted to find a more efficient way to send the certificates to you without waiting up to a month to receive them. You no longer have to fill out a form. If you attended the webinar for 1 hour or longer, you are automatically put into an eligible bucket. You will receive a follow-up email with instructions on how to purchase your certificate. If you attended the webinar for less than 1 hour, you are not eligible to purchase the certificate. Please remember that if you call in through a phone and are not watching the webinar on your computer, our system cannot track your attendance. You are then marked as not eligible.
Okay, I think This is the email thing.
Yes, we just want to make sure, if you haven't already done so, to check your email preferences with CPP. This is important to ensure that you receive our follow-up emails. And also check your spam folders with @cpp.com and add those to your safe list.
Is that all we have to cover there so I can introduce Jim and Jack?
Yes.
Jim and Jack, are you online? Are you with us?
We are. This is Jim.
And there's Jack. Jim and Jack are the education account representatives. They're wonderful about answering questions related to anything regarding CPP assessments and how to use them in educational settings. And if they don't know the answer, they always get you to the person who does. And I think I'm just leaving the promo codes and things like that up here because, Ajane, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions if any have come in.
Sure. So if someone scores high with a J on the MBTI, does that often translate into a high E on the Strong interpretive report?
High J on the MBTI plus high E, enterprising. So enterprising and J. Well, enterprising is that funny theme on the Strong that correlates with all 4 letters on the Strong. I mean on the MBTI, including J. But I don't know necessarily that J correlates with enterprising. I mean, J clearly correlates with conventional. I can't tell you. I'd have to look at all the data, but what we noticed about enterprising is that the one MBTI letter that correlates full bore with enterprising is extroversion. And that just jumps out. There wasn't one heart of type more than the others. There wasn't a JP more than, it was extroversion. But you know, there's something about enterprising that attracts everybody, but I think it can be a pretty J environment. Good question. Another dissertation.
Thanks, Judy. And we have one more question. One individual attended the Ask the Expert webinar last year on type and relationships. Is the one in February going to be any different?
Well, yeah, because certainly last year's webinar generated a lot of questions that I followed up on. So it'll be slightly different. What we do at that webinar that's different from every other webinar is we just put out some very basic concepts and then we turn it over for discussion. So what happens in the webinar, the relationships webinar, is that people send in their questions. You know, my type is INTJ and my significant other is ENFP, and how do we come together in making decisions when we're so different, that kind of thing. Or my boss is an ESTJ and I'm an INFJ and this is what's happening, and what we do is we address all those questions from a type dynamics perspective, not just the 4-letter type, but what part of your type is extroverted, what part of your type is hidden, what part of your type is less preferred, the inferior function, and how does that come out in relationships. And so that's the framework we're using, but the content depends on the questions that come in. I think that's what makes it kind of a really fun webinar, is we don't know where we're going when we start. We put the basics out there, and then you guys use them to come at us with how they're working.
Thanks,
One more?
Judy. It looks like we ran out of time for today.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, we want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy day to attend our webinar and for asking so many questions. And thanks, Judy, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. Everyone, look out for the follow-up email from us in the next few days. And then please remember to join us on February 13th for our next webinar, Exploring MBTI Type Dynamics and Relationships, just in time for Valentine's Day. To register, visit cpp.com/askanexpert. And remember to always check that site to find all of our previously recorded webinars as well as this one. Thank you all for attending and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ajane.